The Lives of the Saints by Father Alban Butler, August 23rd, St. Apollinaris Sidonius, Bishop of Clermont. Caius Solius Apollinaris Sidonius was born at Lyon about the year 431 and was of one of the most noble families in Gaul, where his father and grandfather, both named Apollinaris, had command successively in quality of prefects of the praetorium. He was educated in arts and learning under the best masters, and was one of the most celebrated orators and poets of the age in which he lived. From his epistles it is manifest that he was always religious, pious, humble, affable, extremely affectionate, beneficent, and compassionate, and no lover of the world, even whilst he lived in it. For some time he had a command in the Imperial army, and he married Papionilla, by whom he had a son called Apollinaris, and 2 daughters. Papionilla was daughter of Avitus, who, after having been thrice prefect of the praetorium in Gaul, was raised to the imperial throne at Rome in 455, but being obliged to quit the purple after a reign of 10 months, died on the road to Auvergne. Majorian, his successor, prosecuted his relations, and coming to Lyon, caused Sidonius to be apprehended, but admiring the constancy with which he bore his disgrace, and becoming acquainted with his extraordinary qualifications and virtue, restored his estates to him, and created him count. Majorian was a good soldier and began to curb the barbarians who laid waste the fairest provinces of the empire, but was slain in 461 by Ricimer the Goth, his own general, who placed the diadem upon the head of Severus. Upon this revolution, Sidonius left the court and led a retired life in Auvergne, where he protected his province from the Goths and divided his time between studies and the exercises of piety. Severus was poisoned by Ricimer after a reign of 4 years, and Anthemius chosen emperor in 467, who immediately called Sidonius again to Rome and created him prince of the Senate, patrician, and prefect of the city. His piety and devotion suffered no prejudice in his elevation, and amidst the distraction of his secular employments, in which he made use of his authority only to promote the divine honor and to render himself the servant of others in studying to advance everyone's happiness and comfort. God soon called him from these secular dignities to the government of his church. The bishopric of Auvergne, since called Clermont, in Auvergne, falling vacant in 471, the people of that extensive diocese, and the bishops of the whole country, who had long regretted his absence whilst he was detained in the capital of the world, unanimously demanded that he should be restored to them in order to fill the episcopal chair. Sidonius was then a layman, and his wife was yet living. He therefore urged the authority of canon against such an election, and opposed it with all his might, till fearing at length to resist the will of heaven, he acquiesced, it having been customary on extraordinary occasions to dispense with the canons which forbid laymen to be chosen bishops. He therefore and his wife agreed to a perpetual separation, and from that moment he renounced poesy, which till then had been his delight, to apply himself only to those studies which were most agreeable to his ministry. He was no stranger to them whilst a layman, and he soon became an oracle whom other bishops consulted in their difficulties, though he was always reserved and unwilling to decide them, and usually referred them to others, alleging that he was not capable of acting the part of a doctor among his brethren, whose direction and science he stood himself infinitely in need of. St. Lupus, Bishop of Troyes, who had loved and honored him whilst he was yet wandering in the dry deserts of the world, found his affection for him redoubled when he beheld him become a guide of souls in the paths of religion and virtue. Upon his promotion to the episcopal dignity, he wrote him an excellent letter of congratulation and advice, in which, among other things, he told him, "It is no longer by pomp and an equipage that you are to keep up your rank, but by the most profound humility of heart. You are placed above others, but must consider yourself as below the meanest and last in your flock. Be ready to kiss the feet of those who formerly you would not have thought worthy to sit under your feet. You must render yourself the servant of all." This Sidonius made the rule of his conduct. He kept always a very frugal table, fasted every second day, watched much, and though of a tender constitution, often seemed to carry his penitential austerities to excess. He was frequently in want of necessaries, because he had given all away to the poor. His love and compassion for them, even whilst he lived in the world, were such that he sometimes had sold all his plate for their relief, which having been done without the knowledge of his wife, she afterward redeemed it. After he was bishop, he looked upon it as his principal duty to provide for the instruction, comfort, and assistance of the poor. In the time of a great famine he maintained, at his own charge, with the charitable succors which Ecdicius, his wife's brother, put into his hands, more than 4,000 Burgundians and other strangers who had been driven from their own country by misery and necessity, and when the scarcity was over, he furnished them with carriages and sent them to their respective houses. St. Sidonius made frequent visitations of his diocese, and performed every office of his ministry with all the care and prudence possible. The reputation of his wisdom was so great that being summoned to Bourg, when that see, which was his metropolitan church, was vacant in 472, all the prelates there assembled, with one consent, referred the election of a bishop to him, and he nominated Simplicius, a holy pastor. He says that a bishop ought to do by humility what a monk and a penitent are obliged to do by their profession. He gives us the following account of Maximus, Archbishop of Toulouse, whom he had before known a very rich man in the world, that he found him in his new spiritual dignity wholly changed. His clothing, countenance, and discourse savored of nothing but modesty and piety. He had short hair and a long beard. His household stuff was plain. He had nothing but wooden benches, stuffed curtains, a bed without feathers, and a table without a carpet, and the food of his family consisted of pulse more than flesh. He testifies that the annual festivals of saints were kept with great solemnity, that on them the people flocked to the church in throngs before day, that they lighted up a great many tapers, that the monks and clergy sung the vigils or matins in 2 choirs, and that they celebrated Mass about noon. The city of Clermont being besieged in 575 by Alaric, king of the Visigoths, who then reigned in the southern provinces of France, the zealous bishop encouraged the people to stand upon their defense, by which he exposed himself to the rage of the conquerors after they were masters of the place. He entreated the Arian king to grant several articles in favor of the Catholics, which the barbarian was so far from allowing, that he sent the holy prelate prisoner to Livian, a castle near Carcassonne, where he suffered much. However, Alaric some time after restored him to his see, and he continued to be the comfort and support of the distressed Catholics in that country. He was again expelled by 2 factious wicked priests, but some time after recovered the government of his church, and died in peace in the year 482, on the 21st of August. His festival was kept soon after his death with solemnity at Clermont, where his memory is in great veneration. His body lay first in the old church of St. Saturninus, but was afterward translated into that of St. Genesius.